Welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're able to join us today for the pop-up demonstrations and rethinking activity-friendly outdoor spaces in Delaware webinar. We have additional attendees that are coming in to join us for this webinar this morning. My name is Sarah Pragg. I work at the Institute for Public Administration at the University of Delaware. And I want to just take an opportunity to orient you to the Zoom webinar platform. So as you're with us today, you are automatically muted and your video is disabled. You can hover your mouse over the lower portion of your Zoom screen to access your controls. We encourage you to use the Q&A box to chat with us today. If you have any questions for any of our panelists and speakers, please type your question into the chat and we will do our best to answer it as we go along at designated Q&A portions of this event. If you want to show your participation, you can raise your hand. And we encourage you to use the chat window specifically if you're having technical issues. So if you can no longer hear the audio or if the slideshow is not proceeding, for example, those would be great ways that you could use the chat window. We are recording this webinar and it will go online and we will send that out after the event. And we hope that you will participate in the course evaluation when you leave the webinar. We will be sending a link to the evaluation in the chat and it will also go out in an email afterwards. So we really do appreciate you coming today and we hope that you will provide feedback so that we can learn what we can do to improve in the future. So with that, I would like to introduce you to our moderator for today. We have with us Dr. Jules Bruck. She's the Director and Professor of Landscape Architecture at the University of Delaware, where she teaches courses in creativity, design process, field sketching, and planting design. In addition to leading UD's Living Lab research group, which is putting on this webinar today, she oversees UD's Coastal Resilience Design Studio. She's a registered landscape architect, a permanently certified member of the Association of Professional Landscape Designers, and a CITES accredited professional. And she earned her PhD from Texas A&M University. Jules, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And on behalf of my Living Lab colleagues at the University of Delaware and the Delaware Department of Transportation, I'd like to welcome all of you to our webinar, Pop-Up Demonstrations and Rethinking Activity-Friendly Outdoor Spaces in Delaware. Today, I'm excited to provide you with information on the Living Lab project and a possible opportunity to partner on active transportation pop-up demonstrations in Delaware. Today's takeaways and objectives include key steps to successful pop-up demonstrations, the importance of authentic community outreach and engagement, opportunities to fund long-term changes, initiatives to rethink and support activity-friendly outdoor spaces and streets in Delaware during the pandemic and beyond, and how to partner with Living Lab and DelDOT on an active transportation pop-up demonstration. As your moderator, I'm pleased to welcome all of our panelists and presenters, including UD project team members, Marcia Scott, Nina David, and Aaron Fogarty, DelDOT engineer Paul Moser, and panelists, including Newark City Manager Tom Coleman, Cornerstone West Community Development Corporation's Community Development Manager, April Pagliasotti, and Main Street Wilmington's Director and Downtown Vision Senior Marketing Director, Lonnie Schweger. I'll provide a brief bio as I introduce each speaker. We have a very ambitious agenda with lots of content to cover. The panelists will be addressing questions immediately following the panel presentation on rethinking activity-friendly outdoor spaces. To ensure time for all presenters, please hold your questions until the end of the webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to ask Sarah to post our first polling question. Who is here today? So if you go to your poll, you can click on who is here and we can start to see these populating. We'll give it just a few minutes. until it slows down. Great. Well, looks like about 82% of people have voted, and there's people here from local government. As you can see, not-for-profits is the second most populated category, and then community-based organizations and metropolitan planning organizations. So we just want to take a time to welcome all of you. And it's nice to know who's here today. So thank you for taking the time to answer the poll question. We have one more after the first presentation, so stay tuned for that. So our first presenter is Marcia Scott, who will discuss pop-up demonstrations, 8 steps to success. Marcia is a policy scientist with the Institute of Public Administration, IPA, at the University of Delaware. She has managed and served as principal investigator on research projects to improve mobility and interconnectivity, advance sustainable land use and transportation planning, foster mobility-friendly design, healthy and complete communities, and improve transportation equity and multimodal transportation opportunities. Marcia holds a master's degree in city management from East Tennessee State University. Marcia.
Thank you, Jules. My presentation will highlight pop-up demonstrations, what they are, benefits of these projects, and 8 steps to ensure successful planning and implementation in your community. I'm trying to advance my slide here. Thanks. So you may have heard of the terms tactical urbanism, urban prototyping, planning by doing, pop-up demonstrations. While these terms are often used interchangeably, these are all examples of collaborative approaches that empower citizens to test and visualize changes to the built environment before long-term investments are made. Reconfiguring the built environment and busy thoroughfares can help calm traffic and achieve more walkable, bikeable, and activity-oriented places, but permanent large-scale changes can be costly and difficult to launch. Pop-up demonstrations use short-term, low-cost, and scalable interventions to catalyze long-term change for safer streets and healthy, more vibrant communities. Pop-up demonstration projects provide a variety of benefits. They're a short-term tool to foster community engagement and buy-in, leverage partnerships, and accomplish a range of potential outcomes. In short, they're a chance to start small. Temporary interventions can be tested and inform the planning of costly long-term solutions. So what are the steps to a successful pop-up demonstration? The University of Delaware's Institute for Public Administration identified 8 steps based on our case studies of successful pop-up demonstrations in Delaware, and also information gleaned from Delaware transportation officials, planners, local governments, and community leaders. First, start with a plan. Contrary to what the name says, pop-up demonstrations just don't pop up. It's so essential to carefully, plan a process to implement a successful project. Also, it's important to start with a plan that's been officially vetted and adopted by a local government, metropolitan planning organization, governing body, school district, or organization, including local government comprehensive plans. A plan can justify the need for the project, provide the impetus to carry out recommendations, act as a critical reference point for those unfamiliar with project need, and serve as a basis for a grant proposal. 2, establish a participatory planning process, which considers goals of the project. Why are you doing this, and what do you hope to accomplish? The process should consider these questions. What are the expectations, and are they realistic? What partners are needed, and how can stakeholders be authentically and actively involved and engaged? What are the costs, timeframes, and permitting needs? Finally, who will continue to advocate for changes after the demonstration? The process should consider the planning and policy frameworks before undertaking a project, including transportation governance and finance. The majority of Delaware's transportation infrastructure is designed, constructed, and maintained by the Delaware Department of Transportation. More than likely, a DelDOT special events permit will be needed for a project on a state roadway. Second, the roles and extent of active involvement. You really need to think about assigning roles and responsibilities for both project partners and volunteers. Determine who will be responsible for post-event evaluation. And then third, is there a need for formal policies, procedures, and guidelines to carry out the activity? Does the local jurisdiction or elected officials need to approve the demonstration? If so, you may wish to consider preparing a site plan and design schematic to illustrate what you intend to do and where. A traffic control and safety plan is more than likely essential. Finally, if COVID-19 safety protocols are in place, you need to conduct virtual planning meetings, and when on site, ensure that volunteers are wearing masks and adhere to physical distancing guidelines and requirements. Streets can transform into new spaces that help people safely maintain physical distance while enabling them to access local goods, services, and patronize outdoor dining. The National Association of City Transportation Officials, or NACTO's Streets for Pandemic Response and Recovery, is really a great resource. It recognizes the need to adapt design strategies and policies to address changing pandemic reopening and recovery needs. Third, identify and engage community partners. Nina David's presentation is going to be covering why it's so important to involve diverse stakeholders. 4, collect baseline data. Depending on the project you choose and how much support there is in the community, collecting good baseline data is critical. The more complex and controversial the project or idea, the more data you need. Consider the need for vehicle speed studies, compliance data, and before photos. 5, promote the event and educate the public. If possible, use both high touch or on-site and high tech or virtual or web-based techniques, such as on-site community meetings and or virtual workshops, websites, flyers, posters, and yard signs, surveys, news releases, civic association, community or municipal newsletters, social media, and electronic communications. 6, design the project. And yes, our Living Lab research group can assist with project design. Questions to address when designing the project include, what's the duration of the project? Is it supervised or unsupervised? What materials should be used based on the context of the specific project and location, the expected project duration, and or the need to conform to state, federal transportation guidelines and standards? Will large emergency and public works vehicles be able to safely navigate through the pop-up demonstration? If you think so, you may want to test it before initiating the project. What materials will be used and are they weather hardy? 7, gather feedback, build consensus, and evaluate the project. How do you know if your project is a success? Ideally, plan to collect data before, during, and after the project is installed. When it comes to quantitative data, it's important to gather baseline data to examine changes over time. Qualitative data may be less impacted by the time of day of the week, weather, or special events. Document the project through photos, surveys, or other visual documentation or data collection methods. 8, communicate outcomes and next steps. Continue to foster engagement, input, and involvement to communicate both project successes and the need for project improvements. Also, document outcomes to justify the need to fund permanent built environment improvements in the future. For more information on pop-up demonstration projects, parklets, and stories of complete communities, please visit our Delaware Complete Communities Planning Toolbox at www.completecommunitiesde.org. Please connect and follow Complete Communities on our social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marcia. I appreciate that. And we have a second polling question that is up on the screen. If you could take the time to answer, has your jurisdiction or organization participated in or hosted a pop-up demonstration garden? Or I always say garden at the end of pop-up demonstration, sorry, a pop-up demonstration. So yeah, it looks like we have about 70% of the vote in and 70% of jurisdictions and organizations have not participated in or hosted a pop-up demonstration. So I'm glad to see that we have, that you're here and that experts will be able to help you figure out if this is something that you would like to do in your own community. Excellent. So thank you for taking the time to answer the second polling question. I would like to now introduce our next speaker, Nina David, who is presenting on pop-up partnerships and authentic community engagement. Dr. David is an associate professor at the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware. Her research interests are at the nexus of public policy and urban planning and the broad areas of land use planning, regional planning, and cooperation, growth management, and sustainability. Dr. David was awarded the 2016 Excellence in Downtown Revitalization Award for the Better Block Project by Westside Grows, a neighborhood coalition in Wilmington. She earned a doctoral degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Michigan. Welcome, Nina.
Thank you, Jules. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Today, I want to talk to you all about public engagement, but not theoretically, not an abstract, rather by using an example of a project that I was part of not too long ago, and to maybe offer some lessons learned. The project I want to talk to you about is the Better Block project on Union Street in Wilmington, Delaware. And believe it or not, this project was actually born in a University of Delaware undergraduate classroom. I had been talking to my public policy and planning students at UD about innovations in public engagement. Particularly, I was trying to explain to them that one of the most difficult things to do for planners is to translate policies that are written in text in a plan to actual built environment outcomes on the ground. Meaning, how do you draw that line connecting a policy in a plan to a spatial outcome? I was talking to students about how urbanism projects, tactical urbanism projects, pop-up demonstration projects can actually help us fill that gap, if you will. And two students, Erin King and Matt Rojas, approached me after class to ask if I had any ideas, and if so, would I be interested in working with them on a Better Block project in Delaware? We got to work, and very quickly we started having conversations about what a pop-up demonstration project or a Better Block project in Delaware would look like. And we agreed on two very, very fundamental principles. Number one, we did not want this project to be a faculty research project. We did not want it to be an undergraduate student project. We wanted it to be a project with some sort of potential for long-term change beyond the days of the demonstration itself. We were not naive. We also knew that this is the one area where we had perhaps least amount of control, meaning we were not policymakers ourselves. We might not even be part of the community that hosted the project. So what do? So we agreed that our job then would be to lay the foundation, sow the seeds, if you will, so that any demonstration project that we did would have the potential for future long-term impact. The second big principle was that we wanted the community to own the project, and this was not an inconsequential thing for us. This meant that UD's role would be different. We thought of ourselves as potentially initiating the project and supporting the project, the process, the people involved, and maybe playing a role in helping evaluate the project, but we knew that the project itself had to be led by the community. So based on these foundational principles, we started making some strategic decisions. We knew that whatever project we did had to be supported by the literature, and here both the academic and professional literature, particularly on the types of interventions that we implemented. We also agreed that all policymakers at key decision points needed to be engaged in the project itself. meaning we still wanted it to be a bottom-up process, but everybody with decision-making capacity or authority needed to be involved. We also agreed that the project needed to be evaluated in some sort of a systematic manner to provide opportunities for evidence-based decision-making. We also agreed that there would be absolutely no predetermination from UD itself. We wouldn't play a role in determining where the Better Block project would be implemented. All of that completely would be left up to the community. We wanted to implement a Better Block project in a place, maybe a neighborhood, a street, where there was already a plan in place, because we wanted to have the project be supported by a vision that was already articulated and formalized in some sort of a plan. And we also wanted to fight the tendency of Better Block projects to be very site specific, meaning we knew that if we wanted to have any sort of potential for long-term impact, that whatever demonstration we did needed to apply at a much larger scale beyond that of an individual block. So having a plan in place would help support that, if you will. And the last key strategic policy for us was that we needed a community partner to sort of anchor the project for us. Based on this, the project process that we created looked like this. I had some previous networks and contacts with organizations in Wilmington, Delaware, particularly Cornerstone West, which is a CDC in the west side of the city. I knew Christian Willauer, who was the director of Cornerstone West at that time. I knew how the organization worked, the kind of deep roots that they had in the community, the bottom-up processes that they used to get the community engaged in policymaking. We also knew that the west side of the city had just gone through a very intense plan writing process, and the West Side Revitalization Plan had just been produced. So the first strategic decision that we made was to approach Cornerstone West CDC to ask if they would partner with us. They said yes. And then the students and I went up to the Cool Spring Tilton Park Neighborhood Association. It was important to me to have the students be introduced to the neighborhood so we wouldn't seem like outsiders. I also introduced our students to key people in leadership roles in the West Side, pastors, other community members. Students did a walking tour of the neighborhood. Cornerstone West, through their process, through West Side Grows Together as an extension, and through the community, ended up identifying the 600th block of Union Street as the location for our demonstration project. Students and I also went monthly to the Cool Spring Tilton Park Neighborhood Association meetings to talk about updates and to get the community more engaged. It was important to us to not be UD coming into a community, a neighborhood, to tell them how to make spaces better. We didn't want to be seen like that. So we also applied for funding through Summer Scholars Program at the University of Delaware to embed our students with Cornerstone West for summer. So students would work at the community level through Cornerstone West for the entire duration of their internship there. We also administered pre-surveys and post-surveys, measuring the community's perceptions and attitudes towards Union Street before our project was implemented and after our project was implemented. So to tell you a little bit about the interventions that we made, if you all know Union Street, DE2 is routed along a pair of one-way streets in the city of Wilmington, Delaware. There are Union and Lincoln Streets. Union Street has about 3 lanes of traffic and then 2 parking lanes on either side. This used to be a 2-way street until about the 1950s. If you look at land use along Union Street, one side has a lot of commercial uses and the other side has a lot of residential uses. This is what the street itself looks like. It's very much an automobile-oriented street. You see the 3 driving lanes and you see the 2 parking lanes on either side. And recall, we said we wanted a community or a neighborhood to host a Better Block project based on a plan that was already in place. The West Side Revitalization Plan had several goals articulated for Union Street itself. The plan argued that Union Street and Lincoln Streets needed to be destinations. There needed to be a brand for Union Street. There needed to be public art. Union Street needed to be more than just an automobile heavy street, but also a complete street. There was an interest in improving curb appeal, to do some planting, and to have pedestrian oriented design in the corridor itself. Specific recommendations were also made through the plan. There was a recommendation for back and diagonal parking on one side of the street, planting strips to be added, bump outs, to remove one lane of traffic from circulation, to add visual interest, and so on. Recall, we wanted to engage in evidence-based decision-making, so students also reviewed the literature, academic and professional literatures on walkability, livability, etc., and also, of course, engage the community to get to some sort of consensus on what the interventions would be. And the interventions looked like this. We added banners, etc., to add visual interest to the street. We added crosswalk, one crosswalk where there was none on one side of the block. We brought in vegetation. We did implement the back end diagonal parking. The thing that facilitated the back end diagonal parking was the removal of one lane from circulation, one traffic lane, if you will, as the plan recommended. Removing the lane from circulation and doing the diagonal back end parking allowed us to also reclaim or claim some space for sidewalk cafes or cafe style seating. We had lots of music. We wanted to sort of mimic city life where you would have busking and buskers. We wanted the space to be friendly to a diverse set of community members. If you had kids, if you had pets, if you had dogs. We added a bike lane. If you think of the project for public spaces and the idea that successful spaces are those that allow us to do multiple things all at once. We brought in muralists to do art. We wanted the space to be friendly to kids. And so we had activities for children as well. We had activities for adults as well. And this is yoga being done on the street. And the essential idea was that we did not want Union Street to be seen as just a corridor. We did not want to focus just on mobility. We wanted to treat this, the street, if you will, as a public space and think about how this street could be livable and vital if we could only think about it and reimagine it to be a vibrant public space, if you will. A couple of years after we implemented the project, DelDOT, WilMAPCO, the City of Wilmington, in collaboration with West Side Grows Together and Cornerstone West, engaged in a rapid reconfiguration project to implement some of the things that we implemented through our interventions during the Better Block project itself. Some of the notable changes that were made were indeed removing a lane from circulation, adding a bike lane, and implementing the back-end diagonal parking. So here are some lessons that we learned from the project itself. We learned that people matter and the community cannot be an afterthought. It was not that we went to the community to say, you are in control. Rather, our process was set up in a way that naturally allowed people to participate and participate well. The one thing that we didn't have was too much financial resources. So we were forced in many ways to rely on people and to ask people to come and share their ideas and be responsible for aspects of the project that we necessarily couldn't outsource. And that ended up being a huge positive to us because every person that participated in the project knew that the project wouldn't happen without their participation. So valuing community members and making them feel valued and making them feel part of the process where the project cannot materialize or become a reality without their participation is important. We also learned that plans matter. Plans enhance your bargaining power, if you will. And plans and allow us or enable us to think about the community beyond that of a single block. For Union Street, it was important for us to think about the neighborhood through which the street was located, in which the street was located. We wanted to think about the street itself and not just one little block of the street. And plans allow us or force us, if you will, to think about that. We also learned that institutions matter. Better Block and other pop-up demonstrations are great in providing an immersive experience to members of the public, but they also provide that same immersive experience to decision makers. Sarah Lester, who is the director of Cornerstone West and who played a huge role in making this Better Block project be a long-term project, will tell you she remembers that exact moment when a key decision maker was actually at the event, looked at her and said, this is actually possible. We can actually do it. So engaging decision makers from the outset is very important. Partnerships matter. So picking the right partners and partnerships in support of the project. It might not be equal partnerships, and that might be okay because the right partner has to lead the project. Evidence matters. We collected good data. We collected pre and post data that enabled us to understand why the project was a success and which aspects of the project worked. And that becomes very important if you're looking for long-term change as well. I would also like to add that the Better Block project on Union Street in Wilmington, of course, benefited the community at large, benefited the city, but it also benefited the students greatly. Aaron King, who was one of the students that led the project from UD's side, would end up being hired by a planning consultancy in Washington, DC in his junior year. He was a freshman when we started the project. Matt Rojas, also a freshman when he was part of the project, would end up being the student body president. So partnerships like this in the community with decision makers, UD, educational institutions, students, can serve to benefit all parties involved. And that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. David. I really enjoyed hearing about your West Side Grows project on Union Street, and particularly liked how friendly the spaces you looked, and seeing how many people were engaged and hearing the lessons learned. Next, we'll move on to the panel discussion, Rethinking Outdoor Public Spaces and Curbsides and Streets to Reopen Delaware. I'm pleased to introduce our panelists that include Tom Coleman, who will provide an overview of the City of Newark's Main Street Alfresco initiative. Tom has served as the City of Newark City Manager since 2017. Prior positions with the city include Interim City Manager, Director of Public Works and Water Resources, the Deputy Director of Water and Wastewater. Tom is a graduate of UD's Civil Engineering program, is a licensed professional engineer in Delaware, and an adjunct professor with UD's Civil and Environmental Engineering department. Our second panelist is April Pagliasati. She will present on West Side Grows Together, Curbside Wednesdays on Union Street. April serves as the Community Development Manager for the Cornerstone West Community Development Corporation. In this role, she's helped to create and manage the neighborhood's own iteration of Curbside Wilmington to support small businesses on the west side of Wilmington. April is a graduate of the Public Health and Nutrition programs at the University of Westchester. And Lonnie Schweger will highlight Curbside Wilmington, bringing good eats to the streets. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Delaware and has worked with Downtown Visions for over 10 years. Currently, Laney serves as the Senior Marketing Main Street Wilmington Director and is Executive Committee member of In Wilmington. Responsibilities include overseeing the Main Street Wilmington Facade Improvement Program, assisting small businesses with marketing programs and events, and managing social media accounts. So welcome to all of you, and thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you.
I just want to start by asking for all of you to briefly describe the purpose and objective of your program that you're sharing with us today. So we'll start with Tom. If you could
Thanks, Jules. So Newark's program was made up of two parts. One was a weekly, nightly event on Wednesdays where we closed the road to vehicles, and the other was a 7-day-a-week expansion of outdoor seating into the sidewalks and alleyways around the businesses. Our Main Street, the closure event, actually started primarily due to construction more than COVID. Main Street had been under construction as part of a DelDOT project, a streetscape improvement project, for about 18 months leading up to June of this year. And a lot of our businesses had entered the pandemic in a pretty bad economic position. and our residents and visitors had established routines that had them going around Main Street as opposed to down Main Street. So we wanted to hold an event that would kind of put a period at the end of construction and make it clear to everyone that it was over, with the added benefit that it would help drive some business to our restaurants downtown. So we held the first event was called Welcome Back Main Street, and it was a ribbon cutting event. And we got beat up in social media a little bit for holding an event for the opening of the road after construction by closing it to traffic. But it did end up being very successful. And it worked so well that our restaurants specifically came to us and asked us to hold more events. We added a few more events every other Wednesday, and that went very well. So we ended up adding weekly events through the fall, with the goal of running them until December 2nd. The last few got canceled for weather, but was very, very effective. And like I mentioned, the other portion was the curbside expansion. We allowed restaurants to expand out into the sidewalks, alleys, and we created a process to make it easier to have outdoor music to try and make the events a little more fun. But the main goal was to try and help drive this business downtown.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. April, will you describe your program a little bit?
Sure. So ours was also sort of a two-part endeavor. First of which was an expansion of Curbside Wilmington, which initiated in downtown, I believe with Downtown Visions. And later in the summer, actually September, well, we initiated the planning earlier, but there were just some delays. But so Curbside Wilmington was the expansion in general of the outdoor dining permits, which was something that I believe the whole city was interested in for a very long time. And just, with the issue with the pandemic of like the closures and the governor's mandates and whatnot, it was an experience and effort for restaurants to safely serve their customers. So with the cooperation of the city, we were able to expand to the west side as well. And as a side note, they also expanded to Trolley Square. And then the second part of that was Curbside Wednesdays. So taking inspiration from places like Newark and downtown, Curbside Wednesdays on Union Street was our example and our iteration of that once weekly like happy hour event, intended to promote and let our neighborhood know, hey, this is brand new. We have all these opportunities to dine safely outside. Please support our businesses. They're already struggling. And it went off with great fanfare. And Wednesdays, anecdotally, some restaurants said it was their best night compared with what was going on with the pandemic. So it was a lot of fun.
That's really great to hear. Thank you, April. Lani, would you mind sharing your stories?
Yeah, so once the pandemic began, we immediately started looking at every possible way to support our small businesses downtown, any way to drive business to our businesses and to continue to serve, customers in a safe environment. So that's how the Curbside Wilmington idea began. It allowed our downtown restaurants to expand their outdoor dining into empty parking spaces or potentially into the streets that were closed, directly in front of their businesses, and allowing more seating at safely spaced distances in accordance with the governor's guidelines. We also did the curbside pull-in spots that were designated throughout the downtown area for all businesses, both retail and restaurants, to use for pickup and curbside delivery. And in addition to that, we closed down the 800 block of Market Street every Friday. We called it Curbside Happy Hour, where that went from June to the end of September. And that allowed for the street to be closed to traffic and for live music to be out on the streets and people safely spaced to dine or just enjoy the night. So it was very successful, and our businesses, greatly needed it during that time. Many of them said they wouldn't have been able to survive without the curbside project happening. So it was really a win-win.
That is great to hear. Thank you. And Lani, why don't you just go ahead and answer our next question, which is about the lessons learned. We're curious, was it a success, which you just sort of alluded to, and what challenges did you face?
You want to make everybody happy. So that's always a challenge. And we had 14 restaurants that participated in this with us, and they were all different types of eateries, from fine dining to sit down to takeout. So you want to make everybody happy. And I think the best thing that we were able to do was to get ahead of the game and have one-on-one conversations with some of these businesses, and then have larger group informational meetings to see what worked. We also had created a document that we were able to share with them of potentially what it would look like out front of their business, with being ADA compliant and meeting all the, the state restrictions as well. So that helped for them to visually see something where they could make changes and edits for what worked per business, because everybody had a different amount of sidewalk space, or maybe a corner property or an empty parking spot that could be used. So each business had to be individually assessed and looked at. But another challenge was, besides handling everything with all the individual businesses, was the designated curbside spots. We did have some issues with that, because at the time the city did not have any parking enforcement going on downtown. So it's hard to enforce parking issues when you're not, a parking entity. And we had put up signs, but sometimes businesses would call and say there's cars parked in the spaces longer than, the amount of time allowed, or the signs had been removed because they were temporary signs. So those were some obstacles that we had to deal with along the way. And because we, had curbside happening for a good period of time, we could, week to week, we could kind of adjust things and change things as needed. And that's really what we did. We tried to look, observation wise, what worked and what didn't each week, and speak to the restaurants on a regular basis.
Great, and hopefully once enforcement comes, like parking enforcement came back to Wilmington streets, if you're going to continue to run these, that would alleviate some of those challenges.
Yeah, and the city was very receptive to do that. So they did bring back the parking enforcement downtown and on the riverfront at a couple months after it began, and that did help. The signage remained up for a while. So the curbside was important because it didn't just help the restaurants; it was also for curbside pickups of retailers as well.
Great. Well, thank you. Tom, I'm going to send that same question to you about, was it a success, and why, and what challenges did you face?
Yeah, I think our program was definitely a success. Like Lonnie mentioned, or sorry, it was April. Our restaurateurs said they got more business in the few hours of the event than they were getting in 2 or 3 days otherwise, early in the pandemic, when nobody wanted to go to restaurants. So it certainly helped, and I don't know that a lot of them would have made it through the summer and fall without it. But some of the challenges we faced was, all the restaurants and businesses like the sidewalk expansions, but a lot of the retailers did not like the road closure night, the Wednesday night. So the way Newark's Main Street's set up, they're really long blocks, and there's no other way to get to Main Street except for Delaware Avenue, because of the road closures and the railway on the north side. And our detour, the main detour route, has a low clearance rail bridge on it, which makes it a little more difficult as well. So we are still looking at ways that we can get our retailers more involved. COVID made it so we couldn't have events on Main Street that weren't restaurant related, because we didn't want to have clusters of people violating the governor's orders. So areas where there weren't restaurants, there just wasn't anything going on. So any of the retailers in those areas didn't see much foot traffic, and they ended up closing for the night as opposed to paying people to come in. So that was not a success. That was certainly a challenge and something we're going to work on. Another big one was around ADA. Lonnie mentioned ADA. A lot of people's expectations of what ADA compliance isn't actually what ADA compliance is. So we get complaints that, it's not ADA compliant because I've got to walk around this table, but there's a fine ADA compliant route around the table. So we were meeting ADA, but some people didn't think that we were. So we spent a lot of time going out and meeting with some residents to explain ADA and show the path and show that it was compliant. One thing that we did to maintain fire service access was we left a pretty wide path down the center of the roadway Main Street's one way, 2 lanes of traffic in one direction and 2 lanes of parking. And initially we thought that it was kind of overly restrictive and that it reduced the amount of space for tables. But we ended up having enough table space because not all the buildings were restaurants. So people expanded down the street. And it actually ended up being pretty nice because it gave another route that people could walk up and down the street, ride bicycles, skateboards, things like that, and get them off the sidewalks. So there weren't crowds of people walking through waiters and waitresses. So that worked out pretty well. One thing that I would suggest is if you're doing an event like this, to set very clear expectations for when you're going to cancel the event for weather or rain. We had to put ours up and take it down each day. So it wasn't one that we would just leave up and then leave it up to the restaurants whether or not they use. So if we had a rain day and we had to make a call on rain and the weather was iffy, a lot of the restaurants had reservations booked. So if we canceled a date, they would have to cancel the reservations and schedule. So having clear expectations, if it's the forecast is this at this time, we're going to cancel, or if the weather is forecast to be this temperature or lower, we're going to cancel, would be a definite recommendation.
Wow, a lot of great lessons learned there and great advice. Thank you. April, I'm going to ask you the same question, successes and challenges.
Sure, well, I'll start with the challenges, which initially were just with the nature of our corridor, it was much more spread out. I mean, possibly similar to Newark, but we worked mainly on Union Street, and actually, in fact, all but 2 of our extended outdoor dining permits were on Union Street as well, at least at that time. And the nature of that forced us to be creative and think really hard about how to make this a successful event and promote people going to and going to these restaurants and eating outdoors. So that was a big issue. And then also just not only like Tom said, managing expectations, but our own as well, because we came along when this planning started to expand it to the west side. We initially had one quote about when we were going to have permits, and that was not met. And so just managing those relationships and expectations, both of our own and, especially when working with partners, which were all, great and successful in the end, just being on the same page about what, getting as much information as possible and planning ahead really as much as possible, simply due to the nature of this year and the pandemic and, everything that was going on. Some things we were not able to plan as much in advance as we would have liked. And thankfully, due to the agility and flexibility of many of our partners, including the city and DelDOT and Public Works and whatnot, we were able to get this off the ground. And so, where I would have liked to do a pre-evaluation and baseline evaluation, we were literally flying by the seat of our pants trying to get this off the ground just to save these restaurants, really. And so thankfully, there's always a second round, a second chance to do this and plan more. And thankfully, we got some really great feedback. I did a post-event survey and for both Curbside Wilmington and Curbside Wednesdays. And so, I mean, really, it was a net positive. And some of the great successes were really the strength of our partnerships. Really, we couldn't have gotten some of this stuff through without these partnerships, including the Committee of 100. And I believe Jennifer's on here as well. She's been, great help in advocating for all of us that have been involved with their organization. And this was something that we didn't have a relationship with the Committee of 100 prior to this pandemic. So some good things came out of it. And then also we had some, the West Side has some really strong individual community members. I was worried initially about the attendance because we had no budget for advertising. It was all social media and we posted a lot. And word of mouth, really, we had actually a great core group of people that between our organization, some of our partner organizations, and really just friends and family of some of these community members committed to attending this and sort of building up that momentum of attendance at these events. And really literally and figuratively showed up for these restaurants at a time when it was really, difficult. And that really shows the strength of our community too. So that was a huge success.
That's wonderful to hear. And I just applaud all of you for efforts in helping the restaurants. They certainly needed it. And it leads to questions that are coming up both in the chat now, but also that were pre-sent to us about managing COVID safety precautions. And you've all alluded to the difficulties that you had with managing these projects that are complicated as is during a pandemic. So if you could just, April, I'll start with you, discuss a little bit about how you managed and followed safety precautions. And then specifically, one of the panelists or one of the attendees would like to know, assuming that there was a limitation on the maximum gathering capacity, how would you suggest launching an event that might potentially exceed that capacity without being frustrating for the attendees?
I actually have a two-part answer to this. One based off off the example of curbside, and something that we have coming up, which I think will be really helpful. So looking at curbside, both Wilmington and Wednesdays, we honestly, this is a little different, but we left the responsibility up to the restaurants, of course, supporting them in the meantime. But considering we weren't able to close down the full road, that was very difficult. It's a state highway and whatnot. We weren't unfortunately unable to close that road. So we were able to spread it out a little further. And this is where that creative thinking comes into play. So if you wanted to create a gathering, you could find creative ways. For instance, one of our events over the summer, unrelated to Curbside Wednesdays, was United Neighbors, where we closed down a bridge because we had just put up a beautiful mural on the 6th Street Bridge in Wilmington, which you should all go see. It's called Our Community Grows Together, done by some amazing local artists. But we closed down that bridge, and we spaced out the local activities. So the activities, as an example, were a mask coloring station with hand sanitizer as well for the kids to decorate and take home their own mask. We had takeaway snacks and hot dogs that were all individually wrapped and pre-wrapped before coming, pre-cooked and pre-wrapped before coming. And we had Zumba and a hula hoop instructor. It was a great fun. We worked a lot with our partners as well, to not only brainstorm how we can adapt this for COVID, but still make it fun. And it was even more impactful, I think, because people were so isolated due to this pandemic. And looking forward to some examples, we're actually putting on our annual, in January, it'll be our 9th annual Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Peace March and celebration. And so we had to pivot because we've had, I think, over upwards of 300 people attend this march and celebration, which is all in person prior to this year. And we just have to be creative and adapt. And, it's not all on one person. So we have a lot of creative partnerships. And one way that we are adapting to these challenges is by we're still doing a pre-march cleanup, march socially distanced, and we have a plan in place with DPH. And we are just adapting and making sure that we are reminding everybody to be mindful of social distancing. Everyone's required to wear masks, and then adapting the celebration to be entirely virtual. So everyone that at this point is going home after the march, and then adapting it to be virtual, which would be hosted and not only emceed and hosted, but we'll have performances and everything. So it'll be all live streamed to sort of avoid that congregation, because everything else, everyone's dispersing essentially and moving and not staying in one place, and it's all outdoors anyway. So I think it's just really useful to have maintain good relationships and think really creatively. And sometimes you got it's not necessarily about you got to think outside the box, is what I'm trying to say, for some of these things, and it can be done. Unfortunately, some things may have to change majorly, but it can be, these things can still be done.
Absolutely.
Barring any super mandates or anything.
Right. So Tom, do you have any advice on those precautions that need to be taken?
Yeah, I think April did a really good job explaining, very good ideas. And frankly, I think they did a lot more than we did as far as pushing it, pushing the limits. We pretty much just tried to make the event about the restaurants, and we didn't have anything else around it. We, for the first probably 10 or so events, maybe 8, we gave away free parking. So during the event, we still had our parking ambassadors out, and instead of checking meters, they were handing out masks to people who may not have had it. We provided the extra paths down the middle of the road. But we ended up canceling the last event mainly because of the governor's most recent order. We weren't concerned so much about the activity at the restaurants themselves, but maybe people gathering in the parking lots, or carpooling down, or whatever else. So we didn't think it was a good idea at that point. But some of our other events, we looked at community days is usually on the green. Instead of doing it on Main Street where it would have been hemmed in, we looked at locating it on a different street where we could spread people out more. So we did look at some other alternatives, but again, the most recent governor's order pretty much killed any plans we had. So we'll probably be waiting out a lessening of the restrictions.
Great. Lenny, if you have anything else to contribute to the COVID conversation, please do. And then I have another question I'd like to ask you as well.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that, everybody was obviously taking the correct precautions. One great thing about, at least in Wilmington with Curbside Wilmington and West Side, is that the City of Wilmington was able to provide beautiful custom fencing from the Challenge program. You can see it in the back of April's picture. And those fencing were created, a safe space for the restaurant to have their tables safely spaced apart. So I think that was a key component into, doing it the right way. All the restaurant staff was well prepared in how to, clean up and disinfect spaces, to turn around tables fast. And the state provided a lot of good informational stuff that could be printed out and put on tables prior to people dining to let them know, how to go about it, wear masks in and until you sit down to eat. All the staff wore masks. And Downtown Visions is lucky enough to have a large team of safety and cleaning ambassadors within the Business Improvement District downtown. So we can assist partners at the city with public works by closing streets down or helping people set up or break down tables for the day or the night, and cleaning. We do cleaning on the streets downtown. So there's multiple ways that worked for us in downtown Wilmington.
That's great. And if you don't mind, we just have about 2 more minutes, but I wanted to just quickly get your response to a question that came in about data. And how do you gauge success from a data standpoint? Are these events likely to increase activity that will persist over time, in your opinion? Or is it you're seeing increased activity mainly because it's a one-time event or a rare or one-off event? So Lanny, I'll start with you.
So we did a survey. I mean, that was the main thing, but like I said, we kept in constant touch with our businesses to have one-on-one conversations, email, popping in to see them. But the survey did help us get a lot of stuff. It's always hard to get data from restaurants, especially when it comes to sales and stuff. So that was a little, more challenging, but we did have several of our core businesses that we work with very closely that were able to provide that. And we were able to, show that this program was extremely successful. Now there are costs to it, but a lot of those costs were one-time costs, like the fencing. Once we have it, we don't need to spend that if we do it again in the future, which we plan to do. So there was, once the one-time costs are done, it's very little cost. Again, with the budget, we, like April said, with marketing, the budget's pretty slim, but we did what we could with print and stuff like that. There's also, our partners with the Committee of 100 in the city were able to help us, when we had to get some information done. And we did do a fairly deep dive into the feedback analysis of how this program worked and was it a success? And it was a great success. We had a ROI, return on investment, of 301.4. So that showed that this was a huge success, and we couldn't have done it, like I said, without our partners at Committee of 100 and the City of Wilmington, and working with our neighbors at West Side. It was definitely a group effort, and something like this had always we'd always talked about doing something like this pre-COVID, and it took COVID to get it done and to show that it can be done. And just keeping track of everything. We also had a free valet component that we surveyed. So within just a 1 month period, we had 195 people use the valet service downtown from just June to July. And that is continuing all through January 2nd of 2021 because it was so successful. So just tracking what we could, keeping the information of what was spent on the budgets, trying to have close relationships with our restaurants to try to get sales data and information. The fact that most of these restaurants that participated were retained their staff was another key factor of why this was successful. And keeping track of everything is just, something that you always have to do to make sure that you can continue to show why it's important to keep these programs happening in the future.
Well, that is really inspirational, and I will leave it at that. I know Tom and April probably have equally good answers to that question, but in the interest of time, we'll move on, and we do have 5 minutes allotted at the end to answer further questions if anybody wants to know more. So thank you all for a really inspiring panel discussion. I appreciate it. Now we're going to move on to hear from Paul Moser, who is presenting on moving from temporary pop-up demonstrations to funded projects. Mr. Moser is an engineer with DelDOT. He's been actively involved in the design and reconfiguration of streets to improve safety for pedestrians and bicyclists by slowing traffic speeds, which have been demonstrated through local pop-up projects. Mr. Moser holds a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering from the University of Delaware. Welcome.
Thank you, Jules. And thanks to everyone for sticking on, even though it's a beautiful winter wonderland outside. So Marcia did a fantastic job of talking a little bit about sort of the reason why we're doing these pop-ups and why they're useful. I think Nina and the whole panel did a great job speaking about the broader social implications of them and how useful they can be. And I'm kind of going to speak a little bit about the next step of, okay, well, we've demonstrated this. How do we bring it forth into reality? So one of the common themes, and I've seen it happen several times, and I've probably been guilty of it too. 1 second. Is you spend all this time working with people in the community, working with local officials, and working with random people that are interested in building this beautiful pop-up. You go, you implement it, you spend hours the day before, hours the day before the day before, and then hours the day after cleaning up. It was awesome. You had a great time, but you're exhausted and you've waylaid your other work for 2 weeks and you have other stuff to get to. So you just wipe the dust off your hands, say, great, let's go on to the next thing. And it kind of languishes and, it doesn't really move. Well, if I can implore you guys and ask one thing up front, it's try to avoid letting that happen. If you can, think from the outset about what method and strategy you could use to take this pop demonstration that did such an amazing job of bringing an idea and then moving it into reality by one of the many project development paths available to you. So for those of you who are familiar or who ever worked with DelDOT on any kind of project, you'll know there's more than one way to develop a project, and we're going to get into a couple of them. So why is DelDOT interested in this living laboratory, this pop-up concept? For a number of reasons, which Marcia kind of got at. First off, it's a beautiful, robust public process. It gets us to a more developed concept. It lets us try things out. Hopefully we can build support from local government officials and community members. And at the end of the day, we know that it at least will sort of work as proposed. So what are we looking for in a robust public process? Well, just things you can do throughout the pop-up to make it easier to develop it into a project or to, build a better case for why we should actually implement this. Like they're saying, civic evaluation, any surveys you can do. Can you get a sense of the pulse of the neighborhood? Did they enjoy the project? I think it was a good thing. You know, the comment sections of the Newark Post can be particularly brutal, but they can also teach you a thing or two if you listen. What does social media say about it? Have you got any concerns or any well thought out love letters from the community about how wonderful or terrible your project is? These are all important. So if you have them, save them, hold on to them, distill them, and try and turn them into actionable changes to the design, the concept, or maybe it's time to just kick the concept into the rubbish bin. A more developed concept. So, you know, usually Marcia showed a couple pictures of, you know, designs that were done up front, either by people in the community, by municipal officials, DelDOT, the Living Labs team. A lot of people can kind of, you know, take their idea and put down on paper. Keep that. It's fantastic. Any schematics you had for designing it, keep those. And if you even can, try to develop some quick schematics that you sort of as built it, right? Because I can tell you every single one of these that I've done did not look exactly like it did on paper when we started. Things change, your materials don't work, you run out of materials, you have to switch materials. Maybe it's not quite safe to do something that you'd like to do, you run out of time. So things always change. So try to keep track of what changed, and that should help. You know, when you actually move on to the project development, you can say, oh, well, this is what we actually did. It worked, rather than, you know, try and holding fast to this pie in the sky idea you had. Pictures, take lots of pictures. Pictures are fun. They tell a great story, as you can see. That one was the pop-up mini roundabout in Newark. That was a lot of fun. And the one on the bottom left was when we turned part of South Street into a protected bike lane in Newcastle. Again, really, really cool project. Glad we have pictures. This is a huge one. If you can, try to involve local officials. Try to get them to come to the pop-up, to be involved from the beginning. They are the ones in some, I mean, depending on your jurisdiction, they have some say in whether or not one of these projects is going to move forward. So if you can get your local officials there and interested in it, or state representatives even, fantastic. The most important probably though is public works. If you can get someone from emergency management, you know, like a fire marshal or someone, just to come check it out and see if you're proposing any traffic calming. Okay, well, is this going to impact their operations? Having the person there and aware of what you're doing is fantastic. Because then when you actually come with the idea later down the road, you say, oh, hey, remember when we put these, I don't know, trash cans in the middle of the street and you can still fit a fire truck around it? That's fantastic. So any way you can formalize support, letters are great. We love letters. Emails, resolutions, great stuff. And then this one's kind of important, and back to that last question that was kind of asked. Any way you can keep track of things, any data you can collect is great. Even though that was more on the business side of things, from the traffic impact side of things, you know, if you're going to be installing some sort of traffic calming, well, the goal of traffic calming is obviously to slow down traffic, make the operations a little bit less chaotic. So if we can quantify that, that's the reason why we want to spend money, right? So DelDOT has a lot of different mechanisms for installing traffic calming or projects with that goal. So if you can prove that this project will achieve that goal, then that's a fantastic justification for why we should spend money on it. So speed studies are great. You can work with your local police department, probably even work with the state police. If you ask DelDOT, we can help you too. If we're going to do one of these, then let's try to understand how it's going to impact traffic. We want to know that, even if it's a quote unquote negative impact, then we want to know what that, negative impact is. And if that also aligns with your community goals, well, we can make a decision about, okay, which is more important, squeeze in 25 more cars through this corridor per hour, or having a pedestrian friendly, business friendly environment. So this kind of data really helps with that discussion. Videos are great. You can go back, look at them, see what happens, see if anything strange occurred. There's some really interesting computer vision software and programs out there that can really tell some interesting things. And any observations, anecdotal or quantitative, are fantastic. And then, like they're saying, if you can collect info on business, and if that improved business operations for people, amazing. So you have this beautiful pop-up, you have a great time, you're tired, and you have all this, you have mountains of data, letters of support from every single member of council. Great. So now what do you do? You're at this crossroads of how do you actually develop it? And this is, as I was saying earlier, if you've worked with DelDOT, we're a multi-pronged beast. right? So there's all these different programs, all these different people who do different things and have different jurisdictions, and we all manage different programs and contracts that operate differently and are best suited for certain things. So there's a couple different ways you can approach it, and that depends on the unique nature of your pop-up and sort of the intensity of construction required to achieve something that's more permanent. So I've sort of broken things up into two categories, a shorter term approach and a longer term approach. The shorter term approach is working directly with DelDOT or local government using more flexible contracts and programs to try to install something that's similar and captures the spirit of what you did, right? So we're doing this pop-up with temporary materials, right? With paint, with tape, with chalk, with delineators, with plants, trash cans. So chances are those materials are temporary enough, and if that can actually work as you installed it, there's probably a way that we can make it a little bit more robust and fit into the MUTCD and the typical roadway design that our traffic section aims for, and we might be able to get that implemented rather quickly. So that's the shorter term, is working with DelDOT or working with local government or legislators to get funding to just make it happen quickly. Longer term is more of these traditional programs that have either an application process or are more competitively awarded. So a lot of times, if your pop-up requires something more intense, if you need to like move the curb lines, or if you need to, I don't know, totally change a drainage system or add some sidewalk, sometimes that is a little bit more than these flexible, quick contracts can manage. So we have to kick them to another pot of money, which sometimes has a more rigorous application process or requires a little bit more time. So what question should you ask yourself? Okay, well, what's the pop-up like? Okay, the way you had it with these temporary materials, is that going to achieve the goal? At least a little bit. Is that going to slow traffic? Is that going to make it a better bike space? Is that going to make it a little bit less chaotic on the roadway? Is that going to allow businesses to eat outside? If yes, and you can do that with temporary materials, then we should see if we can do that in a shorter interim project. If no, if you need to pour new concrete, if you need to pour new sidewalk, if you need to significantly change the roadway or change traffic operations, if you're getting rid of a right turn lane, or if you're taking an entire lane of traffic to put a bike lane, something like that, that requires a little bit more modeling and understanding and approval from different people. So it might not happen right away. So that might kick you into that longer term funding. So this is a short list. There's other stuff out there and other ways to make it happen, but just to give you an idea of some of these programs that DelDOT at least interfaces with, I put a couple up here. So in the short term category, there are legislative funds from the Community Transportation Fund. To my knowledge, we haven't used CTF funds for any of these pop-up projects, but it is a possibility. DelDOT traffic open ends, local funds from your local government. If you do one of these pop-ups on a city street and the city loves it and they have the money, there's nothing to stop you from doing it. Short-ish term is kind of the more flexible, but still require an application process, still require a little bit more planning to access these funds. And then longer term is just, further down the road. So like I said, CTF, these are funds which are appropriated to legislators every year, and they're discretionary to the legislator. Usually they're used for maintaining subdivision roads, non-municipal roadways that aren't necessarily part of DelDOT's pave and rehab program. They're used for fixing sidewalks. They're used for ADA repairs. They're used for new stop signs, all sorts of stuff, drainage projects. But they are very flexible, and they have been used for other. They've been used to leverage federal grants. So this is maybe somewhere you could consider looking, but they are limited and usually reserved for other things. This is DelDOT traffic is a fantastic. So DelDOT traffic is a section of DelDOT, and they manage these statewide open-end contracts that really do the bulk of the noticeable work that DelDOT does on the roadways. They manage all the signals, they manage all the pavement striping, they manage a lot of the signs. A lot of these crossing islands you see around the state are managed and constructed through DelDOT traffic through some of their very flexible contracts. They're very quick to act, and this is actually the means that was used to implement the Union Street project. Because it was mostly pavement markings, we were able to leverage this traffic's Newcastle County pavement marking contract, and they could get a fantastic unit price and get it done very quickly. We just had to figure out the design, we had to figure out the ADA stuff, and their contractors are used to acting very responsively. So this was a really fantastic vehicle for achieving these pop-ups. We also did the down at the bottom right, the Casho Mill buffered bike lane, which was done as part of a pop-up, then became part of a Safe Routes to School project, and then got taken up by DelDOT traffic. So just to give you an idea, we kind of ping pong things around depending on where it fits best and how we can do things cheapest and easiest. So if we have one of these pop-ups where there's minimal, like I said, minimal traffic operations being impacted that aren't scaring everyone, minimal concrete being poured, no curbs being moved, it's going in the existing profile of the roadway, we can probably execute it through their open ends pretty quickly. And DelDOT can help you with the design. So if this is, if what we're doing is something that's pretty temporary and can be moved to slightly less temporary, this is probably the way we're going to go. We can also design, they can help out with design. And then there's the Safe Routes to School program managed by Chip Knievel. This is a fantastic little program. It's exactly what it sounds like, right? So it's a federal program. Well, actually, technically, it's not it's part of TAP now. It used to be a federal program. Pretty much the state has capped it to about 125, but it might be close to $200,000 cap in the future. Small projects focused on improving bicycle and pedestrian networks around schools. The projects are administered by DelDOT. There's usually a pretty robust outreach and education process and working with the schools. Again, this is what that sort of Casho Mill pop-up project sort of came into as a Safe Routes to School project that's being implemented. I think been implemented in many ways already. So this is a pretty flexible one. Again, work with DelDOT. We can put you in touch with Chip. We can see what the program looks like, if there's funds available and when, and maybe we can make it happen, especially if there's a school component to it. Actually, that's a requirement. Transportation Alternatives Program, Mike Hahn, your favorite local bureaucrat, manages this one. DelDOT has put a cap on TAP projects of $1 million. TAP projects require a 20% match. So if you're going to be using, if you're going to turn one of your pop-ups into a TAP project, you need 20% of the construction costs to come from your legislators, to come from your local government, to come from some sort of grant. Somehow you got to come up with that. So TAP, it basically requires working with a local government or someone with money. So there's a bit more of an application process every single year. Not every single year. There's usually some sort of call for projects, and we usually go to the MPOs if you have an MPO, and they give us a list of projects, and then we sort of internally prioritize and see where it fits in the program and do a few of these a year. So it's a really fantastic program. Unfortunately, there's a very high demand for TAP dollars because it's a really great program. In the past, we have had really good success leveraging our pave and rehab projects with TAP projects. So that would be Main Street Newark, for instance. They had this huge epic pavement project that they were dreading for years. And they were able to work within our TAP program to take the TAP money and basically help design. I'm not sure if the TAP designed it. Well, either way, they had designed for it, and they took that 1 million TAP and put it on top of the pave and rehab, and were able to pay for most of the bump outs and the fantastic pedestrian infrastructure on the roadway. They also did that, I believe, on Concord Avenue in Wilmington. It's a really great process because we can do these beautiful streetscapes and then pave afterwards, and it just looks great and everyone's happy. So this is a great program. But again, it requires a little bit more planning, application. It's going to be longer to get in line. But if you're serious about your project, it's a great way to go. And it can also be phased. So you can do, whatever, pop-up phase 1, pop-up phase 2, pop-up phase 3, over 3, 4, even more projects if you need to. And I almost hesitate to put this one in here, but the pedestrian access routes program, I think Abe, I saw him on the attendees list. What's up, Abe? So this is a relatively new DelDOT program. It's been talked about for a long time. Essentially, it's the vessel for completing DelDOT's ADA transition plan. So fixing all of the non-compliant sidewalk features in the state. We have a huge amount of work to do in that realm. So this program was set up at first to do sort of big linear projects for fixing a lot of sidewalks, a lot of curb ramps, and making them compliant, ADA compliant, that is. And it's sort of shifting into being more of an open-end sidewalk project or an open-end program where we have very flexible contractors who can go fix this curb ramp, and this section of sidewalk. And we give them a work order and they go do it in a few weeks. So that's where it's headed. And Right now, the focus of this is an ADA. So I don't really want to advertise this as a way to get these projects done. But if your pop-up project is somewhere where there's already an ADA deficiency and that's on the list, and the pop-up is, for instance, putting in a few bump outs and I don't know, you're not gonna get trees paid for this program, but if it's putting in bump outs, a mid-block crossing and fixing some sidewalk, there's a chance that we might be able to leverage the PAR program to not only fix an ADA non-compliant feature, but also get some community projects done. So only applicable on state maintained roads though. And then moving into the longer term, you have this fantastic vision. It worked out great. You know, your local legislators love it. The MPO loves it. The local government loves it. We're going to move into like a more serious project. So the bike ped pool is also managed in DelDOT planning, where a lot of these other programs are managed. Federally, you know, it's using CMAQ money. It also requires a 20% match, but that is usually covered by the state. This is a competitively ranked program. So if you go and read the Delaware 2018 Blueprint for a Bicycle-Friendly Delaware State Bike Plan, we lay out the process that this program will be managed. Essentially, the MPOs will be doing bike or pedestrian plans, and they say, these are the projects we'd like to apply for the bike ped pool. We get them from the MPOs every year, and we rank them according to which ones improve pathway and low stress cycling networks the most. And we fund usually, like, we're thinking one in every county. The program is still developing, but this is usually for projects that are, you know, a little bit more road work. You know, we say between $1 and $3 million, but it has been more and it has been less in the past. So think of this as slightly bigger than the TAP program, more focused on standalone bike ped infrastructure, where the TAP program is more for streetscaping and other sidewalk and fun stuff like that. Again, this one's administered by DelDOT, and because you have to work with the MPO and you have to get it on their list, and then it has to go through our process, there's a little bit more of a lag in how long it's going to take you to get this project going towards development, but a great program. And if you just want to rebuild your entire main street, then get in line for the capital program. This is the way DelDOT does most big projects. It requires extensive coordination with the MPO. You know, you have to get it on DelDOT's capital transportation program, which is approved every couple of years. And that could take anywhere from, I think 6 years is optimistic. And yeah, so that was just a couple of a little brief overview of some of the programs in DelDOT that can fund these projects. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. You know, I try and stress this to people that DelDOT does things a lot of different ways. As you just saw, that was like 8 programs of how you could possibly construct a small sidewalk. So it can get complicated, but the biggest thing I can ask you guys is think about project development up front. If you have an idea of how you want to see this project actually developed, and if you have no idea, that's totally okay. Ask us at DelDOT, ask us at Living Labs. We'll try and help structure and set things up so we can actually move your project towards development at the right time. Things can move slowly. It's the government, but be patient, keep momentum, and, you know, stay on top of it. Involve local government decision makers up front, and wherever possible, try to leverage existing public works projects or you know, local priorities, because that is key to pushing these things forward. If there's already momentum for another project, tack this on, find a way to incorporate it. So hopefully that was interesting. If you guys are interested, please email me, call me, whatever. And thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Paul. I appreciate it. And we're going to move on to our final presenter, Erin Fogarty, who will address the question, what is Living Lab? Erin Fogarty has a master's, is working toward her master's in plant science at the University of Delaware, and her research is focused on short-term multimodal improvements to roadways and the development of equitable green space. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Ancient Greek and Roman Studies and a Bachelor of Science in Plant Science, both from the University of Delaware. Hi, Erin.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. Yeah, so my job is basically to kind of let you know how we can help you now that you know all about pop-ups, let you know how we can help you actually start one. So Living Lab is a DelDOT supported interdisciplinary research collaborative. We have members in the Biden School, the Landscape Architecture Department, and the Institute for Public Administration, all at UD. Our basic goal is to assist Delaware governments and community organizations in planning, executing, and evaluating pop-up demonstration projects with the big overarching goal of testing viability of long-term infrastructure improvements and placemaking initiatives. So we have a few kind of types of projects that we work on. A road diet is where we basically take the road that's there and we kind of shift the lanes around, reallocate space with safety in mind. So you might have remembered when Nina was talking about turning a travel lane into back-in parking on Union Street. That would be a really good example of a road diet. You could also, add a bike lane, add a mini circle, add a bulb out. You could turn it into a parklet in some cases, maybe some streetscaping. A complete street is when we take an entire street and we basically change most everything about it to accommodate travelers and pedestrians of all ages and abilities. So again, that could include buffered bike lanes, ADA improvements, pedestrian improvements, adding in a bus shelter or a bus bubble, which I'll talk about a little bit later, improving level of traffic stress or bicycle level of stress, and other stuff like that. We also do, safe routes to school programs, which just improves connectivity and accessibility of, sidewalks, bike lanes, trails, access to public transit, and just places you would go anyway, like schools or grocery stores or the library when the library opens again. It's not open right now, which is sad. Parks, healthcare facilities, stuff like that. Basically just making it easier and safer to get people where they want to go. We also work on activity-oriented spaces, which are used to kind of take space that's unutilized or underutilized to kind of serve a community need. So again, this utilizes the better block approach. We basically take spaces that are not used and use them to promote the growth of healthy, vibrant neighborhoods, like a pocket park or a small community garden, stuff like that, maybe a pop-up shop, things like that. So basically what we do is we provide consultation support to interested parties. We can provide select materials and some financial support for materials that we don't already have in our lending library, which again, I'll talk about. We help in planning, design, and implementation, and we help with data collection tools to kind of do pre and post analysis of your pop-up. And again, we're kind of working right now on editing our data analysis tools to be low touch, so something that doesn't require people to be out on the street interacting, just to conform to COVID protocols. So some materials we can provide are, spray painted applicators. We use a chalk paint that comes off with rain within like 6 months-ish, so it doesn't require any removal. Select infrastructure, again, on a case-by-case basis, depending upon what you need, how much it costs, and if it's reusable, and stuff like quick curb and other delineators. So quick curb is a really cool thing that we use to kind of provide physical separations between pedestrian and bike areas and motor vehicle traffic. And so what you guys would do, what our community partners do, is kind of collaborate with us, volunteers, and other people in the community, gather support from businesses, bureaucrats, volunteers, to do things like put up, maintain, and disassemble the design. Again, our team is relatively small, so we do rely on, volunteers from the community, and that also helps with the whole ground up approach, and conduct pre and post demonstration evaluations using provided materials that we have to assess, solution feasibility. And again, right now, since we can't really be out and about, it's more on our end, because what we've kind of been exploring is use of QR code surveys. So that wouldn't necessarily require much community work, but again, this is thinking long-term. And then determine the need for a traffic control or regulatory approval. So that means like getting a special event permit from DelDOT if you need to close off a road, getting, approval from your local government if they require a permit for special events. I think Newark and Wilmington both do. something that a lot of people use are actually parade permits, because they require a similar blocking off of the roadway just to install and take down. So here are some examples of projects we've completed or are currently working on, just to kind of get your brain working. So in October 2019, didn't put the date, and it was about the 14th, I think, in Newcastle last year, we worked with the Rivertowns Festival, which is a bike ride from Delaware City up to Wilmington that goes through Newcastle, and the City of Newcastle, to test a bi-directional, so two-way, protected bike lane along South Street. That's a 7th Street. It started at 7th Street, to improve the safety of pedestrians and people on bikes. That intersection is really high traffic because it's Route 9. People tend to use it to bypass Route 1, which ends up being just crowding everything. The traffic, the stop sign situation is kind of confusing to people who aren't familiar with the area. So we kind of just wanted to make it safe for the increased bike traffic. The installation was very well received and was observed actually being used both as a cycling path and as a sidewalk extension. Like, we saw people walking their dogs in there, which was something we did not expect, but we did like. The city government recently has been working on receiving a grant to assess the feasibility of the project on a longer term scale, which is really cool. So the eventual goal is to kind of shift the road over and have a parking protected bike lane on the site. So where the current parking lane would be the bike lane, and then the parking lane, the bike lane, and the parking lane and the travel lanes would be moved 10 feet. I guess that's south. It's kind of hard to understand. I do have documents if you're interested in seeing them, but I'm going to move on for now. Another one that we're working on, which I'm really excited about, is working on an intersection on Jessup and Pine Street in Northeast Wilmington. Again, our completion of projects has kind of been stalled because you can't really do community organizing work when you can't be actually outside in the community. But we've kind of been working on this for about a year now. So as part of Collaborate Northeast Working Group's mission to advance place-based redevelopment in North Wilmington, we are working with community members and the working group to redesign the intersection at Jessup and Pine Street to add improvements in transportation and aesthetics. So the issue here is it's just a really big intersection, no real stop signs, two-way going over the 16th Street Bridge. It's kind of a disaster waiting to happen because there's just a lot of unused space. So what we've explored in the past is forming a kind of a traffic median, not quite a roundabout, maybe a curb extension, a bus shelter. We're adding actual shelters. There's a bus stop on either side of the intersection, but there's no actual shelter there and no crosswalks, which is bad because there's a pediatric center and a daycare right there. So we're looking at adding those and traffic calming solutions. And we're likely going to install this in summer 2021. The third project, which I'll go over, is ongoing in Little Creek, Delaware. That says Wilmington. I should have edited this more. It's in Little Creek, Delaware, which if you go east out of Dover, it's right on the water. And we're working with Coastal Resilience Design Studio, who crafted a master plan for the site. Including transportation improvements like gateway medians, crosswalks, curb extensions, painting the parking lane, as you can see in this image provided to us by Coastal Resilience Design Studio. And since this would be obviously a very, very, very expensive project, what we're kind of coming in and doing is installing it again using temporary materials like quick curb and such, to make sure that it works before the community goes and tries to get funding for a permanent iteration. And we plan on implementing this in spring 2021 to kind of coincide with the fishing season, which provides, which causes more traffic in the area because it's right near the Port Mahon Lake. We do have a website, so if you need more information, go check us out. It's an ArcGIS hub. I made a tidy URL because that's just easier to remember than a string of letters and numbers. So that's where you can find us. You can get our contact information, learn about our projects. We also have a curated toolbox of pop-up resources and inspiration, which Marsha made, which is really, really cool. Just if you want to see not just how projects have been done in Delaware, but across the country. And they have been popping up more recently because of COVID. People are really getting into having, extra space to work out and to explore and to kind of get out of their houses since we've all been kind of cooped up. So if you're interested, if you're into this, some next steps would be to identify a project, location, and community partners. We prefer projects that fill a gap in exit infrastructure that are found in local comprehensive or transportation plans. I spend a lot of my time reading transportation plans, and plans that positively impact disenfranchised groups or transportation justice groups, meaning groups that are underserved by kind of more traditional transportation planning. Set a tentative date. Consider any local events with which your event can coincide. Just like how we did in Newcastle, we coincided it with River Towns. In Northeast, we're hoping to do it at about the same time as the Clifford Brown Jazz Festival. This helps not only have more people see the event, but it gives more of an opportunity for feedback and potentially more volunteers, and fill out and submit our project request form, which can be found on our website, or you can contact us. Our contact information will be on the next slide. And we'll also send it out with the information, with the feedback page, like feedback form for the webinar. So thank you so much for listening. I know this was kind of short. You can find our email and our webpage below, and my phone number if you need it. I don't think you'll need it, but just in case. So yeah, contact us there, and we really look forward to hearing from you and working with you. So thanks.
All right, Erin, why don't you keep that slide up if you don't mind. I just want to say thank you to all the panelists and presenters and attendees. I apologize, we've gone a little over, but please email us with any questions that remain unanswered. I hope you enjoyed the presentations and the discussion. Please provide feedback on the evaluation form, which Sarah sent in the chat, and contact Living Lab if you are interested in hosting a pop-up project in 2021. Happy holidays to everyone, and I look forward to connecting with you on a pop-up project soon.